We're very happy to speak with Pasi Penttinen, who is EPIET alumni from cohort 2001 and a long-term ECDC specialist. Now, like most of us, all in quarantine. So we're doing this interview from your home office in Finland, I guess.
That's correct, yes.
And we're going to talk about EPIET 25th anniversary. So Pasi, I'm very happy that you're available to join. And as you know, the first question that we had prepared is to hear a little bit more about your best or your favorite memory from the EPIET training.
Well, that was a really difficult question. I mean, I think the whole 2 years of the EPIET training itself was just such a fantastic experience of being working in another country with the hands-on training on the job itself, being able to understand how other European countries are working with the modules being in different places. But I guess I must say that it was the 3-week introductory course, which was really sort of the hook to the whole program. At the time, that was being held at Veire du Lac by Lake Annecy, Le Pensier, and we spent 3 intensive weeks over there with a really tightly packed training schedule, but then also in this fantastic environment over the weekends. We went jogging, swimming, mountain climbing, paragliding, some of us. So it was just something that fulfilled all kinds of dreams of adventure at that time. So I think that's something that I will always carry with me.
Thanks for sharing this memory, because it immediately triggers some pictures in my mind of some of our swimming contests. I remember having taken a dive into this very cold water of the lake together with you, and some fragments of my memory were taking me back to the thought, I wish I was a Finn, because then I would stand this ice cold water a bit better.
Absolutely. And Arnold, I think you should improve on your swimming skills, because that cheating technique, it doesn't really work in swimming that well.
I think
the water was pretty cold even for a Finn at the time.
It was, yeah. Maybe it's good to tell let's say the younger alumni who joined, let's say in recent years, that the introductory course at that time, when we did it in 2001, there was only a handful of fellows. So the majority of people in the introductory course, they were participants who joined the course just for the 3 weeks. They were working in different institutes in different parts of Europe. And then after the course, they went home again, and a handful of fellows went to their institutes for the 2-year training. So we always had this soccer match between participants and facilitators. And talking about cheating, Pasi, we always made it a point that when we presented in the lectures the historic overview of the soccer matches between participants and facilitators, we always tweaked the figures in such a way that the facilitators would come out quite favorably. And we were actually waiting for some of the participants to stand up and to say, this is fake news, this is a fraud. You should calculate those rates very differently. Sometimes it happens, but not all the time. So I think that's part of the atmosphere I remember from EPIET, always also challenging participants to take a stand.
Never let an epidemiologist keep the count on sports competitions or board games.
That's very true. Okay, I think now it's time to go to the next picture, because you're coming too close to my home turf now. Actually talking about games and games in epidemiology that influenced my, let's say, current professional path. But I'm also quite interested to hear how EPIET kind of has shaped or moved or influenced in some way your professional path.
But it has had a huge impact on my whole career. I was a relatively junior epidemiologist at the time, but came from an environmental epidemiology background, and had already quite a bit of theoretical academic training under my belt once I joined the program. In 2001, we started the course right after the 9/11 attacks in the US and the anthrax investigations that were taken in place then. So there was a whole lot on emphasis on biological threats, not only natural but man-made threats at the time. So that gave a sort of sharpness onto the experience to start off the training program, and after the training, being thrown into outbreak investigations, being thrown into situations where you need to figure out new ways of building up surveillance systems, where you need to be sort of figuring out how do you guide the policymakers on quite important and big public health decisions. That whole way of thinking and working has influenced me throughout my career. It just seems that the challenges and the questions, the sort of magnitude of these issues, at least for me, seem to be sort of just growing larger and larger throughout it. I mean, at the end of the EPIET period, we had the SARS epidemic. We didn't have social media at the time, but we had these kind of internet-based discussion forums where that news was leaking out first at the time. During my time here in ECDC, I've been then following another coronavirus, which was the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, which is a very similar kind of event, but never evolved into quite the same scale of incidents that SARS did. And we thought, although all the preparedness activities were going into place, but you seem to come to an understanding that for most coronaviruses, you should be able to contain these situations into quite limited clusters. And of course, now we're in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic with the COVID-19 situation, which is, I think none of us working today expected that we would see this before our retirement or during our professional careers. I mean, it is the worst public health crisis, a communicable disease crisis we have seen during our lifetime. So it has been hugely exciting. I think the skills and the sort of background that EPIET brought with me has carried me throughout my career, both here in the Swedish context. I worked some years in Indonesia, so in the Indonesian context, and then now in the ECDC European/global context also has been helpful. That's one part of it. The other part of it is, of course, the networks that you established during those 2 years are something which I guess in some of the next questions we'll be discussing.
Thanks for sharing that, and you have taken us on a route from 2001 and those dramatic changes at the beginning of this century, where kind of the world lost kind of the naive look at international health and international relationships when those attacks and those threats, which are man-made, really made us very much aware of in which directions we should look when we're making threat assessments and when we're looking at biological threats. To the current situation with the pandemic and like you say, this unprecedented public health crisis. What is your view on how can you see kind of the contribution of this network of alumni to the current COVID situation? Do you see any particular impact or influence that network of alumni has, and would you consider that an added value for the hypothetical situation that if there wouldn't have been such a network?
I'm strongly of the opinion that the EPIET training, which existed before ECDC and any other formal networks were set up at the European level, is really the core backbone of European communicable disease control at the European but also the national levels these days. If we look at the COVID-19 response, we of course have probably pretty much all of the current EPIET fellows are involved in the response, either at the national level or supporting international organizations in the response. But then if I look back at my cohorts, so as you said, at the time the EPIET cohort was pretty small, so we were cohort 7. So out of the cohort 7, my course mate Fernando Simon, he is leading the response in Spain. Line Vold in Norway is a core member of their response team, and I've seen her interviews in TV on a regular basis. Biagio Pedalino spent several years training EPIET fellows and FETP fellows in and out of Europe that are now responding to this outbreak. So Angie Rose is right now supporting us, both us and WHO, in the COVID-19 response, setting up vaccine effectiveness work and SARI surveillance and so forth. So it's pretty much everyone who were participating on those cohorts are in really core positions in the European response today. It's quite amazing to see that. And if you look at other cohorts already from that time, you'll note that the director of ECDC is an EPIET fellow from early years. So it's quite impressive to see how, not the course provided not only the training, the hands-on skills, the networks, but it also created that kind of the spirits in the training that people have remained in the field, which I don't think is very easy in any area. I mean, people have different interests, diverging career paths and so forth. But I think if you look back, you will see that quite a large portion of the trainees from the EPIET program have remained in public health jobs, either in the public sector or in the private sector, where they can actively apply those skills that they learned during the training.
Yeah. Thank you for taking us also through, not just through memory lane, but also to point out some of the fellows from your cohort 7. I'm also thinking of Johannes Schnitzler, for example, who is at the influenza surveillance at WHO headquarters, and Gabriele Breugelmans, who's head of the epidemiology at the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. I can see that fabric. What I also like is you point out to something that you call the esprit de corps, or the EPIET spirit, which I think everyone recognizes that has been through EPIET or that has been working with EPIET for so long. And still, if you look at kind of the core of our business, which is counting, which can be counted, something like this EPIET spirit is the thing that cannot be counted and probably counts the most in terms of how it structures public health in Europe. So I've always found that quite difficult to translate to policymakers who have to decide on the future of EPIET funding in the past. And even within ECDC, this has not always been a straightforward discussion to really to clarify why it is important that people meet each other in a program like this, and that a course like you, we started our conversation about, the two of us dipping in this ice cold Annecy Lake, and that was the first time you and I met, Pasi, and I think for me it created a bond that always lasted, and that was not the fact that we learned to calculate odds ratios and to do multivariable analysis together. It's also these things that we experience together that really create trust between two human beings. And I think when, especially now in a crisis, we see how important trust is between professionals as well, because you can be the best competent professional in the world if you don't trust someone to share your data with or to share your uncertainty with. And uncertainty, I think, is the key word of this whole COVID experience of this year. At least we are just standing at the beginning of our discovery road of what this virus is and how it works in the community, and I think we will have decades to come to learn from that, and we can learn best by also sharing our uncertainty and our lack of knowledge. And that is something I believe that that a network like I've gotten to learn EPIET is best in, and then you progress, then you really move forward with big strides. So thanks for bringing that up. So my final question would be, if you would kind of dare to cast your imagination for the next 25 years, what would be your wish for the EPIET network for the next 25 years?
That's a long period of time, and there will be huge changes in our environment during that time. So it's really, really difficult to say. One of the core questions is that how much do we have need for this kind of really shoe leather epidemiology training, which you can do, in the best of circumstances on the back of an envelope in a village in Africa or Asia or in a disaster situation, versus how focus more on utilizing new technologies, focusing in how do you sort of model human behavior with mobile networks, for example. These kind of questions which become realities in large-scale outbreaks in Europe. And there are sort of academic processes that are utilizing on these. And that's linked also to the question of which was there in 2001 on what is the added value of the EPIET training versus the academic programs. There's plenty of Masters of Public Health programs out there that provide tools and skills in epidemiology, in microbiology, in public health decision making, and so forth. And you do have, as you said, Arnold, there's this network that gets created. It's the bonding which is very important in that. But I think every now and then you need to critically revisit the way that the training program is run. Now, in terms of the wider network, I see that this has been growing, and I'm sure will be growing in terms of the coverage that the alumni have in different member states, in EU institutions, the private sector, and so forth. What I do see as an opportunity there, or a big opportunity there, is the fact that when we have sort of transnational outbreaks in Europe, ECDC plays an important role in that. Very often EPIET fellows gets involved and get sort of allocated to work on these topics. We don't really have a European response mechanism that is functioning very well on the field epidemiology and microbiology side. There are some sort of issues related to the willingness and the legal structures in member states to accept this kind of support. But there's also a lack of a structure to actually offer and run that support. I think within ECDC, that has been one of the areas that has been very difficult for us to build up in since our establishment in 2005. There have been a number of steps forward in that area. I think the liaison work with GORN for the international missions is working quite nicely today. We played a very significant role in the two large Ebola outbreaks that's happened in recent years in Africa. But it's still, we haven't really seen a sort of good response team efforts happening in member states, at least that I can think of during the last 10 years. There are many member states where I think you could just use the help of a group of epidemiologists or microbiologists when you're responding to a large outbreak. And this I think is a opportunity still to be sort of capitalized on for the network.
Like a European response structure that supports member states.
Exactly.
Interesting, very interesting. Thanks a lot. So Pasi, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate that. I hope that we can meet each other quite soon, face to face again, and that we can look back at Ebola and many other shared memories, enjoying a nice drink and some further stories.